It starts with something simple. A courtroom, a security guard, a woman just trying to take a seat. But what looks like a normal day in court quickly turns into something much bigger when a racist officer decides to make her the target. He thinks she's just another face he can intimidate, humiliate, silence. What he doesn't know is that she's not just any woman. She's the one person who's been sent to expose all of them. And when she reveals who she really is, this whole courtroom is about to come crashing down. Get ready for a story about power, corruption, and justice served cold. Because trust me, you won't believe what happens next. And hey, before we dive in, let us know down in the comments. What time are you watching this? And where are you tuning in from? We'd love to hear from you. Most days in Franklin County, Tennessee, start off quietly. It's the kind of small town where folks know their neighbors by name, where the courthouse sits like an old relic on Main Street, with white columns, red bricks, and a flag waving proudly out front. A place where justice is supposed to mean something. But on this particular morning, something felt different. She walked through the heavy wooden doors like she'd been here 100 times before. Tall, beautiful, confident. Vanessa Monroe didn't belong to this town. You could tell that from the moment she stepped onto the marble floors. The way her navy blue suit fit her perfectly buttoned just right. Sharp lines, no nonsense. Her hair was pulled back in a low, neat bun, not a strand out of place. She didn't carry herself like someone who was here to watch. She carried herself like someone who knew something was about to go down. The small-town folks sitting on the long wooden benches turned their heads, almost in sync, sizing her up. Who was she? A reporter? A lawyer? No one had ever seen her before. And in Franklin County, if you're black and you don't belong to a familiar face or a known family, people start whispering before you even sit down. But Vanessa didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She moved with a kind of calm that made you pay attention, whether you wanted to or not. She wasn't alone. Beside her, an older man in a wheelchair, dressed in a simple dark green jacket and slacks, slowly rolled forward. His hands trembled a little as he pushed himself down the narrow aisle toward the gallery. His name was Derek Monroe, a retired Army veteran, a man who'd seen more battles than anyone in this courtroom could imagine. But today, he wasn't here for a fight. He was here to support his daughter, the woman walking beside him, steady as a rock, eyes locked on the front of the courtroom, like she could already see what was coming. They settled on the second row. Vanessa leaned down, whispered something in Derek's ear, and he nodded. She reached into her leather purse, pulled out a small water bottle, twisted the cap, and handed it to him. Careful. Thoughtful. Like she'd done it 1,000 times before. From the corner of the room, standing near the double doors, Officer Travis Beckett watched them. 52 years old, buzz-cut gray hair, belly just starting to hang over his belt. His job was courtroom security, but everybody knew Beckett took his job a little too seriously. Some whispered that he enjoyed flexing his authority, especially on people who looked like they didn't belong. And this morning, the moment he laid eyes on Vanessa, something in him just shifted. He narrowed his eyes. "Who the hell does she think she is?" he muttered under his breath, adjusting his utility belt like he was already preparing for a confrontation. To him, it wasn't just her face he didn't recognize. It was her confidence, her posture, her refusal to shrink herself. Beckett had seen people come through these doors, scared, apologetic, eager to avoid trouble. But this woman, no, she looked like trouble wasn't even on her mind. Vanessa knew he was watching. She could feel it, that heavy stare. The kind that tried to make you shrink, tried to make you question why you were even there. But she'd felt that kind of stare before. On military bases, in briefing rooms, on the streets of cities that didn't welcome her kind. And every single time, she'd learned to stand a little taller, to let them stare. Today was no different. The courtroom buzzed softly as people whispered about the high-profile case on the Dokita local police sergeant accused of tampering with evidence in a drug case. It was a case the entire town had been talking about for weeks, and Vanessa, well, she had more reasons than anyone in this room could guess to be here today. Because Vanessa Monroe wasn't just some curious visitor. She wasn't here by accident. She was on assignment. FBI Internal Affairs had sent her here undercover, unannounced, uninvited. Her job? To observe, to listen, to gather everything she could about how deep the corruption ran in Franklin County's justice system. She wasn't just here to witness a trial. She was here to see who protected who turned a blind eye, and who abused their power while the whole world pretended not to see. And if there was one thing Vanessa Monroe knew how to do, it was to stay invisible until the moment she needed to be seen. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Vanessa leaned in again, whispering softly, "You good, Daddy?" He nodded, managing a slight smile. His voice was rough but full of quiet strength. "You just remember who you are, baby girl. That's all that matters." She gave him a small nod, then turned her gaze back to the front of the courtroom, where the bailiff was preparing to announce the judge's arrival. But the real story hadn't started yet. It was about to, and when it did, not a soul in that courtroom, not the judge, not the DA, and certainly not Officer Beckett was ready for what Vanessa Monroe was about to reveal. The room felt smaller the longer they sat there. That's how tension works. It shrinks a place down until all you can feel is the heat building in your chest. Vanessa sat quietly next to her father, eyes forward, but her senses were wide awake. She could feel every little shift in the courtroom, the way heads turned, the way whispers floated in the air like smoke. She knew what they were whispering about. She didn't need to hear the words to know. There's something about a black woman walking into the wrong room with too much confidence that makes small-town folks uncomfortable. And Franklin County was showing its true colors this morning. You see, this town wasn't known for being friendly to outsiders, especially not outsiders like Vanessa. She knew that the moment she crossed the county line, the way people looked at her at the gas station, the way the diner got quiet when she ordered her coffee, none of it surprised her. But standing out here, in this courthouse, that was part of the job. What did surprise her was how hard Officer Travis Beckett was still staring. It had been a full 5 minutes since she'd sat down, and the man hadn't taken his eyes off her once. You'd think his job would have kept him moving, checking doors, keeping an eye on the crowd, staying professional. But no. Beckett was planted by the back wall like a statue, arms crossed, jaw clenched, watching her like she was some kind of threat. Vanessa knew that look. Every black person in America knows that look. It's the kind that says, "You don't belong here, and I'm going to make sure you remember it." She leaned back slightly, resting her arm on the back of the bench like she was getting comfortable. It was a small move, but it sent a message: "I see you watching. I don't care." That tiny gesture lit something in Beckett's face. His lip curled like he'd just been challenged in front of the entire room, though no one else had even noticed. Not yet, but they would. The courtroom buzzed again as people checked their phones, leaned in to whisper updates to their neighbors. The case everyone had come to see hadn't even started, but already the room felt on edge. Derek shifted next to her. She glanced down, saw him rubbing his knee. The old war injury had been bothering him more lately. She leaned in again, soft and low so only he could hear. "You want to leave, Daddy? We don't have to stay." He shook his head slowly, never taking his eyes off the front of the room. "Number, you stay. You finish what you came here to do." She nodded. She'd learned that kind of stubborn from him. Years of service. Years of being the only black man in a room full of people who didn't want him there. He knew exactly what she was walking into today. He knew exactly what this would cost her if it went south. And still, he told her to stay. Beckett pushed off the wall suddenly, moving toward the aisle. His boots hit the floor heavier than they needed to. Loud, deliberate. He didn't speak. Not yet. He just moved closer, like a shark circling the water. Vanessa could feel her heart start to pound, not from fear, but from calculation. What's his move gonna be? What's he trying to prove? And how far is he willing to go to make this personal? The bailiff stood near the front, adjusting papers, getting ready for the judge to enter. People barely noticed Beckett closing the distance toward her row, and still, she didn't move. She didn't flinch. Derek finally noticed, his voice barely a whisper. "He's coming this way." "I know," she whispered back. Beckett reached the edge of their row and stood there, towering over them. He looked down at Derek, then back at Vanessa. "Need you to sit still, ma'am," he said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "Court's about to start. No more moving around." Vanessa turned her head slowly toward him, her voice just above a whisper. "I'm sitting. You got a problem with that?" It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Calm. Controlled. Not rude. Not loud. but enough to let him know she wasn't gonna let him flex on her without pushing back. Beckett's jaw tightened again. His hand hovered near his belt, resting on the butt of his taser. A warning. A reminder of who held the power in his courtroom. The air got heavier. Vanessa leaned in close to her father, brushing invisible lint off his shoulder like she hadn't heard a thing. It was the smallest act of defiance, but in that moment, it felt like a spark hitting dry grass. Beckett wasn't used to being ignored. He shifted his stance, stepping even closer. "Ma'am," he said again, his voice dripping with condescension, like he was speaking to a child. "I said sit still and stop moving. You're disturbing the court." Vanessa sat all the way back in her seat now, locking eyes with him, her voice cool as ice. "Court hasn't started yet, so unless you've got something real to say, move along." You could have heard a pin drop. Beckett's face darkened, his eyes narrowing like a man who'd just been slapped in front of his own crew. He wasn't used to people pushing back, especially not her. And in that moment, something snapped in him. The people sitting nearby started to notice the tension. Heads began to turn. Whispers started again, louder this time. And Vanessa knew. The real trouble was just getting started. You know, there's a fine line between keeping the peace and starting the fight. And Officer Travis Beckett? He'd never learned the difference. He didn't move along. He didn't back off. No, not Beckett. Instead, he stood his ground like he had something to prove. Vanessa could see it written all over his face, the way his jaw clenched so tight you'd think his teeth might crack, the way his hand kept hovering over that taser like it was itching to be used. And just when she thought he might walk away, that he might come to his senses, Beckett took one heavy step forward and leaned in. "You got a smart mouth for someone sitting in my courtroom," he whispered, low enough that only she and Derek could hear. His breath smelled like burnt coffee and sour attitude. Vanessa didn't even blink. "It's not your courtroom," she shot back, her voice so soft it could have passed as casual conversation. "And I'm not afraid of you." Those words. Right there. That was the spark. Beckett's face turned red. He straightened up, glanced around, noticed the people nearby starting to watch. He had a choice to make, back off or double down. He chose wrong. With his boots stomping loud enough to grab the whole room's attention, Beckett marched around to the end of the row, forcing his way into the narrow space between the benches. People turned their heads, watching now, sensing the shift. The courtroom hadn't even come to order yet, but the real show had already begun. Derek grabbed Vanessa's arm gently, trying to calm her. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Baby, just let it go." But Vanessa? She wasn't built for backing down. Beckett pushed past Derek's wheelchair, brushing up against him like he wasn't even there. And that's when Vanessa stood up, not fast, not aggressive, just stood, calm, steady, like she was daring him to explain himself. "Do not put your hands on me," she warned. The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. Beckett's smile spread slow, twisted at the edges, like he wanted her to say that, like he'd been waiting all morning for an excuse. And then, right there in front of everyone, he reached out and grabbed her arm. The gasps came fast. The courtroom went from buzzing to dead silent in half a second. Vanessa pulled her arm back hard, standing her ground. "Get your hands off me!" she snapped, louder this time. Heads turned. Phones started to lift in shaky hands. People knew something wasn't right, but no one moved. Not yet. Beckett didn't let go. "I said sit down!" he barked, shaking her arm like she was some kind of criminal. Vanessa tried to pull free again, but his grip tightened. You could see it in his face. He wasn't just trying to control her. He was trying to humiliate her. "You're disrupting court proceedings," he shouted, loud enough to make the judge look up from her papers at the front of the room. Judge Martha Coleman raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed but not fully aware of what was happening yet. She adjusted her glasses and tapped her gavel lightly. "Officer Beckett, what's going on back there?" she asked, her voice sharp. Beckett didn't answer. Not right away. His attention was locked on Vanessa, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. His knuckles turned white on her arm. Vanessa stood taller, refusing to flinch. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, loud enough for the judge to hear. And that's when Beckett snapped. In one fast, ugly motion, he yanked her forward, pulling her half a step off balance, and without warning, he slapped her. Hard, right across the face. The sound of it echoed through the courtroom like a shotgun blast. Gasps. Shouts. A woman in the back dropped her phone, the clatter breaking the stunned silence. Derek pushed himself forward in his chair, rage flashing in his eyes. "Hey!" he shouted. But his voice cracked under the weight of it. Vanessa staggered back, hand flying to her cheek. The burn of it lit her skin on fire, but it was nothing compared to the fire rising in her chest. For half a second, the world stopped spinning. Everyone froze. Beckett stood there, breathing hard, like he'd just won some sick game. But Vanessa? She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't fall apart like he probably expected her to. She squared her shoulders, adjusted her jacket like nothing had happened. And with ice in her veins, she spoke 3 words that sent a chill through the entire room. "Are you done?" Beckett blinked, taken off guard by how calm she sounded. But the people in the room? They weren't calm. The phones were up. The whispers turned to murmurs. People leaned in, watching every move like they knew something big was about to happen. Vanessa glanced toward the judge, who now stood frozen, mouth slightly open, unsure of what she'd just witnessed. And just like that, Vanessa took a slow, deliberate step forward toward Beckett. The room held its breath, because whatever happened next was going to change everything. It's strange how fast a courtroom can turn into a battlefield. One second, you're sitting in what's supposed to be the house of justice. The next, it feels like you're standing on the edge of a war zone. Vanessa stood there, her cheeks still burning, her hands clenched at her sides. But what burned hotter than the sting on her skin was the look on Beckett's face. He looked proud, like he'd just put her in her place, like he expected her to crumble right there in front of everyone. But she didn't. Instead, she stood even taller. The crowd didn't know what to do. People shifted in their seats, whispering louder now. Some leaned forward, gripping their phones tighter, recording every second like they knew this was bigger than just some courtroom drama. This was something they'd talk about long after the doors closed. And still, the judge said nothing. Judge Coleman just sat there, stunned, gripping the edge of her bench like she couldn't quite process what she'd just seen. Maybe she thought she'd imagined it. Maybe she thought it couldn't possibly have happened right there, in her courtroom, in plain sight. But it did, and Vanessa was about to make sure everyone knew it. Slowly, she turned toward the judge, her voice loud enough to carry all the way to the front of the room. "Your Honor," she called out steady and clear, "are you going to allow this?" The judge flinched, snapping back to life like someone had just poured ice water down her back. She glanced toward Beckett, then back at Vanessa. "Officer Beckett," the judge called, trying to regain control. "What exactly is happening back there?" Beckett didn't answer right away. He stood frozen, as if realizing for the first time that the room had turned on him. His jaw worked back and forth like he was chewing on the words he wanted to say but couldn't quite spit out. Vanessa didn't give him the chance. She took another step forward, not backing down an inch. "He just assaulted me, Your Honor, right here. In front of all these witnesses." Gasps rippled through the courtroom again. Someone in the back whispered, "She's right. I saw it." Another voice chimed in, louder this time. "I got it on video." Beckett's head snapped toward the crowd, his face twisting into something between fear and rage. He wasn't in control anymore. The moment had slipped right through his fingers. He turned back to Vanessa, pointing a shaky finger in her face. "You're disrupting court proceedings," he hissed. "You refuse to comply with my orders." Vanessa took another breath, steadying herself, knowing exactly what he was trying to flip the narrative, turn her into the problem. But she wasn't about to let that happen. "I didn't break a single law," she said firmly. "I didn't move. I didn't shout. I didn't resist. You came to me. You put your hands on me. And now you're lying about it in front of everyone." The judge held up her hand, trying to quiet the growing noise in the gallery. "Officer Beckett," she repeated, this time with more force. "Stand down, now." Beckett shook his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. His face turned bright red. "With all due respect, Your Honor, she's causing a disturbance. She needs to be removed." You could feel the tension snap like a rubber band stretched too far. Vanessa turned toward the crowd, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Do I look like I'm causing a disturbance?" she asked, slowly sweeping her eyes over the faces staring back at her. Dozens of phones were up now, recording every word, every movement. "No, ma'am," someone shouted from the back. "She's done nothing wrong. another voice called. Beckett took a step toward her again, but this time Vanessa raised her hand, palm up, stopping him cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," she warned, her voice low, but powerful enough to silence the crowd all over again. Beckett froze. You could see the conflict playing out on his face, pride telling him to finish what he started, fear starting to creep in now that he realized the walls were closing in. And still, the judge didn't stop it. Not yet. Vanessa took another deep breath, knowing this wasn't over, knowing he wasn't finished. But she also knew something Beckett didn't. She wasn't here alone. She wasn't some random black woman he could push around without consequence. She was here on official business. And if Beckett wanted to push this any further, she was more than ready to show him exactly who he was dealing with. Derek, sitting quietly behind her, whispered again, his voice trembling with age but strong in spirit. "Remember who you are, baby girl." Vanessa nodded slowly, never taking her eyes off Beckett. Because what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Vanessa Monroe had come prepared to expose every single one of them, and she was just getting started. Beckett's hands were shaking now, and not from fear at least, not yet. It was something worse. It was that toxic mix of anger and embarrassment, the kind of boiling frustration that happens when a man who's used to having all the control suddenly feels it slipping away right in front of him. And make no mistake, everyone in that courtroom could feel it too. Vanessa saw it before he even moved. She watched his breathing change, watched his fists curl and uncurl at his sides. She knew that posture too many years in the military had taught her how to read body language before a man ever made his move. But this wasn't a battlefield, not officially. This was a courthouse, a place that was supposed to stand for order, for truth, for justice. And yet, here they were. The judge cleared her throat again, louder this time. You could tell she was trying to pull the moment back under control. "Officer Beckett," I said, "stand down." But Beckett? He wasn't hearing a thing. His blood was roaring in his ears, too loud for that now. His pride had already taken the hit, and like a man too stubborn to retreat, he doubled down. He took another heavy step toward Vanessa, finger raised like he was scolding a child in church. "I don't care who you think you are," he growled through clenched teeth. "You're gonna learn real fast how this courtroom works." And right there, in front of the judge, in front of the crowd, in front of every phone pointed straight at him, he grabbed Vanessa's arm again. Harder this time. The crowd gasped again, louder than before. One woman shouted, "Get your hands off her!" But it was like Beckett didn't even hear it. Vanessa's body tensed, not from fear, but from fury. She felt Derek's hand on her back, trying to steady her, trying to keep her from exploding. But something in her snapped anyway. "Let me go," she demanded, her voice razor-sharp, slicing through the silence. Beckett leaned in even closer, his mouth just inches from her ear. "Make me!" And that was it. Vanessa twisted her arm free with a move so fast, so clean, it caught him completely off guard. She stepped back, raising her voice for the whole room to hear. "I am not your suspect. I am not under arrest. You are assaulting me in front of witnesses, in front of the judge." The phones were shaking. Now people were holding their breath, recording every second, knowing they were witnessing something they'd be telling their grandkids about one day. Judge Coleman banged her gavel once, twice, 3 times. "Order! Order in this court!" she shouted. But no one stopped. Not this time. The room had already turned into a circus. Beckett, humiliated and out of control, reached for his taser. And that's when Derek spoke, louder than anyone expected from a man his age. "Don't you dare." His voice cracked like thunder through the courtroom, his old, frail body trembling in that wheelchair. But his words, they hit like a sledgehammer. Beckett flinched, his hand hovering over the weapon, suddenly realizing every eye in that room wasn't just on Vanessa anymore, they were on him. You could feel the shift. Beckett's breathing got heavier, chest rising and falling like he was fighting himself. You could see the panic start to spread in his eyes, but the damage had already been done. He tried to turn back to the judge, tried to explain, but Vanessa stepped in front of him, cutting him off before he could open his mouth. "You put your hands on me twice. You assaulted me. You reached for your weapon while I stood here unarmed and silent. You are out of control, and you know it." The room was spinning now, not for Vanessa, but for Beckett. His face turned from red to pale in a heartbeat. The judge stood slowly from her bench, her face drained of color. "Officer Beckett," she called, her voice barely holding together. "You are done. Leave this courtroom now." Beckett turned to her, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're taking her side?" he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of it. Vanessa stepped forward one last time, closing the gap between them. "It's not my side," she said, her voice steady, cold. "It's the law." Beckett's eyes darted around the room like he was searching for someone to back him up. But no one moved. Not a single soul in that courtroom stood with him. He took one step back, then another, and finally, like the coward he truly was, he turned and stormed toward the exit, slamming the doors behind him so hard the walls shook. And just like that, the courtroom held its breath again. But Vanessa knew better than to think it was over. Not yet, because the truth was, Beckett might have left the room, but the real storm, the one she'd come here to face, that storm was still coming, and Vanessa Monroe was ready to meet it head-on. When Beckett stormed out of that courtroom, slamming the doors so hard the windows rattled, you could almost feel the entire room exhale. It was like someone had been holding the air hostage, and now, finally, people could breathe again. But not Vanessa, not yet. She stood there, fists still clenched, her heart pounding not from fear, but from restraint, because every instinct in her body had wanted to react, to defend herself right there in the moment when his hand came across her face. But she knew better. She'd learned a long time ago that the world doesn't give women like her the luxury of reacting first. No, women like her, they have to be twice as patient, twice as careful, and 10 times as prepared. And prepared is exactly what Vanessa Monroe was. The judge slowly sank back into her seat, visibly rattled. She rubbed her temple like she was trying to figure out how to pull this courtroom back from the edge. You could tell by the way her gavel hand trembled ever so slightly that she knew she'd lost control of her own house. Derek, still sitting behind Vanessa, leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "You all right, baby girl?" Vanessa nodded without turning around. She didn't trust herself to speak just yet. Her jaw was tight, her pulse still racing. She took a deep breath through her nose, trying to center herself. She couldn't afford to let anger win. Not here, not yet. The judge cleared her throat again, adjusting her robe like she was trying to reclaim her authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, forcing her voice to steady, I want to remind you that this courtroom is a place of order. What just happened is not acceptable, and I assure you it will be addressed." She paused, scanning the room as if daring anyone to challenge her. But the damage had already been done. Everyone knew it. Vanessa sat back down slowly, smoothing her jacket, trying to look like she wasn't still shaking inside. She reached for Derek's hand, squeezing it once without looking at him. It was her silent way of saying, "I'm okay, for now." The judge looked down at her docket, trying to reset the room. "We're here today for the State versus Carter Sergeant Alan Carter, charged with evidence tampering, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice." The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Because that's why Vanessa was really here. That's the case she'd been sent to observe. Sergeant Carter wasn't just some random bad apple. He was the reason Franklin County had landed on the FBI's radar in the first place. And she wasn't about to let some small-town security guard derail the bigger mission. The prosecutor stood up at the front of the room, Henry Ross, the district attorney, a man whose reputation for cutting deals and protecting his political allies was as thick as the files on his desk. Vanessa had studied him, watched him work cases before. He knew how to talk pretty, how to sell the illusion of justice. But behind that silver tongue was a man who would do anything to protect the people who kept him in power, including cops like Beckett, including dirty officers like Carter. As the DA began reading the charges, Vanessa sat silently, observing every word, every move. She wasn't here to interrupt, not yet. She was here to watch, to listen, to document. Because when she stood up again, she was going to have everything she needed. But as the DA spoke, Vanessa noticed something. A shift, a flicker of unease on the judge's face, a hesitation in the prosecutor's voice when he listed the charges. Like he was already laying the groundwork for something less than justice. She leaned over to Derek, her voice barely a whisper. "Watch his hands," she said, nodding toward the DA. He's bluffing. Derek followed her gaze, his old soldier instincts kicking in. He nodded slowly, understanding exactly what his daughter was seeing. The DA was stalling, softening the language, making excuses before the defense even had a chance to open their mouths. And then it hit her. They were about to throw the whole case. Vanessa's stomach turned. She knew this playbook. Water down the charges, make it sound like a misunderstanding, offer a deal that looked like accountability, but let the guilty man walk free. It wasn't justice. It was theater. And the people in this room, the people who wanted to believe in the system they were about to get played. Vanessa clenched her jaw, her mind racing. She wasn't just here to watch anymore. She was here to stop this. But she couldn't blow her cover too soon. If she stepped in now, she'd lose the bigger picture. So she waited, listening, calculating, because every second they tried to sell this lie, they were giving her more ammo to burn their whole operation to the ground. And deep down, Vanessa Monroe knew the real show was just beginning. Vanessa shifted in her seat, but not because she was uncomfortable. No, she shifted because she knew this moment, this quiet little performance they were putting on up there was about to reach its breaking point. She'd seen this move 100 times before. It was the oldest trick in the book. Act like you're seeking justice, while setting the stage to let the guilty man off easy. And the DA? He was playing his part to perfection. He spoke with that practiced tone, the kind of voice that sounded official. But if you listened closely, there wasn't any real conviction behind his word. He was reading the charges like they were lines in a bad play, softening them with phrases like possible misconduct and procedural oversight, when the truth was sitting right there in black and white evidence: tampering, abuse of power, obstruction of justice. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. She glanced over at Derek, who hadn't taken his eyes off the DA since the man started speaking. Derek's jaw was tight, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair until his knuckles turned pale. He knew what was happening. He'd seen it his whole life: different courtroom, different faces, same corruption. Vanessa leaned in close, her voice just a whisper. They're setting him up for a slap on the wrist. Derek nodded once, low and steady. Ain't that always the way? She leaned back again, pressing her lips together to stop herself from reacting too soon. Timing was everything. If she blew this open now, she might expose herself before she had the proof to take them all down. She needed Beckett back in that room. She needed him to make one more mistake. And she had a feeling he wasn't finished with her yet. Just as the DA started to hand the floor over to the defense attorney, the doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Heads turned. A hush fell over the gallery. Vanessa didn't even have to look. She could feel the air shift. Beckett was back, and this time, he wasn't alone. 2 other uniformed court officers flanked him, their faces unreadable. They walked in slow, deliberate steps, eyes locked on Vanessa like she'd already been found guilty of something none of them could explain. Beckett didn't even try to hide the smug grin spreading across his face. He walked straight down the aisle, stopped just a few feet from Vanessa, and crossed his arms like he was the sheriff of the whole damn state. Vanessa didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even flinch. Derek, however, shifted in his chair again, his breathing heavier now. Vanessa could feel the tension rolling off him like a wave. She placed a calming hand on his shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. Beckett leaned down, lowering his voice just enough so only Vanessa and Derek could hear. "Looks like you're not as smart as you think," he sneered. "You should have left while you had the chance." Vanessa slowly turned her head, meeting his glare with a look so steady, it felt like time stopped for a second. "You came back," she said, her voice like ice. Beckett leaned in closer, his breath hot on her cheek. "You're leaving one way or another." The 2 officers behind him shifted their weight, ready to move if Beckett gave the word. And just like that, Vanessa knew. He wasn't here for justice. He was here for revenge. The judge noticed the commotion and banged her gavel again. "Officer Beckett, what is the meaning of this? I told you to leave the courtroom." Beckett stood up straighter, putting on a show like he suddenly remembered where he was. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he called out loud enough for the whole room to hear, "this woman is disrupting court business. She's refusing to comply with security protocols. We have reasonable grounds to remove her." The lie came out smooth, like he'd practiced it. The judge hesitated, glancing between Vanessa and Beckett, clearly unsure of what to believe anymore. Vanessa slowly stood to her feet, pushing her shoulders back like she was bracing for a hurricane. "You're lying," she said calmly, addressing the judge. "You saw what happened. Everyone in this room saw what happened. I haven't disrupted anything." He put his hands on me. Twice. The gallery started murmuring again, phones lifting back into the air, ready to capture whatever happened next. Beckett took a step toward her again, his voice rising with fake authority. "You're under removal order, ma'am. You need to come with us." Vanessa held up her hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "No," she said firmly, "I'm not going anywhere." The room fell dead silent. Vanessa reached slowly into her jacket, moving deliberately so that every camera, every witness, and most importantly Beckett could see exactly what she was about to do. And as she pulled out the small leather badge case and flipped it open, the entire courtroom froze. Gold. FBI. Internal Affairs. The words hit the room like a freight train. People gasped. A few in the gallery stood up without realizing it. Even the judge's mouth dropped open as she leaned forward, squinting to make sure she was really seeing what she thought she was seeing. Beckett took one full step back, his face drained of color. And Vanessa? She just stood there, holding the badge steady, her voice low but crystal clear. "Now, do you want to try that again?" You could hear the shift in the room like someone had cracked the foundation under their feet. People weren't even whispering anymore. No one moved. No one dared. Every single eye in that courtroom was locked on that little piece of leather and gold shining under the fluorescent lights. FBI. Internal Affairs. And it wasn't just a badge. It was a threat, a declaration. Proof that this woman, the one Beckett had just laid hands on in front of God and everybody, wasn't just a face in the crowd. She was the one person who could burn their entire system to the ground. Beckett's mouth twitched, like his brain was scrambling to figure out how to recover. You could see it all over his face: panic, disbelief, and something else. Something even more dangerous. Desperation. Vanessa didn't move. She let the silence hang there on purpose. She wanted everyone to sit in it, to feel the weight of what was about to come next. She turned slightly, giving the gallery a better view of the badge. People started whispering again. Only this time, the whispers weren't about her, they were about him. "He's done. She's FBI. Oh my God. She's here for them." Beckett's jaw clenched so tight you could see the vein in his neck pulsing. He looked toward the two officers flanking him, searching their faces for backup. But neither of them moved. You could tell by the way they shifted on their feet they weren't about to touch her now. Not after that. And the judge? She looked like she was about to fall out of her chair. "Miss Monroe?" the judge stammered, her voice cracking just a little. I need to ask, is this real?" Vanessa turned toward her slowly, lowering the badge just enough to look the judge dead in the eye. "It's real," she said, her voice flat, controlled, and cutting through the room like a knife. "I've been assigned to this courthouse for months, undercover, watching, listening, documenting everything." The crowd gasped again. The judge sank back in her chair like someone had just pulled the floor out from under her. Vanessa turned her attention back to Beckett, who still hadn't moved. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or beg for a way down. "Go ahead," Vanessa said softly, taunting him now. "Make another move. I dare you." Beckett's face twisted, and for a second, it looked like he might. You could feel the tension ripple through the air like static. His fists clenched again, his eyes darting around the room. He knew the cameras were on. He knew the witnesses had seen it all. And still, pride is a dangerous thing. He took one slow step forward. The crowd collectively held its breath. Derek gripped the edge of his wheelchair, leaning forward like he was ready to launch himself out of that chair if Beckett so much as raised a finger. But then, something in Beckett broke. It was like watching a man deflate in real time. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched, and the fire in his eyes, it just went dark. He stepped back again, raising his hands like he was surrendering. "You set me up," he whispered under his breath. Vanessa leaned in, dropping her voice low so only he could hear. "No," she replied coldly. "You did that all by yourself." The two officers, standing behind him, exchanged nervous glances, clearly realizing they'd backed the wrong man. Beckett turned to them, searching their faces one last time for support, but all they gave him was distance. Vanessa took a deep breath and turned to the judge again. "Your Honor," she announced, her voice ringing out like a bell. I have hours of footage, dozens of witness statements, and a full investigation file on Officer Travis Beckett's abuse of power. And I'm prepared to present all of it right here, right now, if you'll let me." The judge swallowed hard, her face pale as she looked down at her docket, realizing that this entire courthouse had just been flipped on its head. "Miss Monroe," she croaked, barely finding her voice. "Approach the bench." Vanessa nodded once, closing the badge and tucking it back inside her jacket. She turned to Derek for just a moment, resting her hand on his shoulder. "It's starting," she whispered. Derek looked up at her, pride shining in his tired eyes. "Go finish it," he whispered back. And with that, Vanessa walked to the front of the courtroom, every step echoing through the silent room. The gallery parted like the Red Sea, eyes wide, mouths hanging open. People knew they were watching something they'd never forget. Beckett stood frozen in the aisle, breathing hard, his face a storm of regret, rage, and fear. And Vanessa? She never looked back, because in that moment, she knew the real power. It was finally in her hands. Vanessa could feel it as she walked. Every eye, every breath, every thought in that courtroom was aimed straight at her back. And for once, she didn't care. Not anymore. Because Beckett wasn't the only one exposed now. So was the judge. So was the district attorney. So was every single person in that courthouse who had turned a blind eye, while men like Beckett stomped all over people like her father, people like her, for years. She reached the front of the courtroom and stood tall just a few feet from the bench. The judge leaned forward, taking off her glasses slowly, like she needed a second to gather herself. You could see the panic fighting for space behind her tired eyes. Vanessa didn't blink. Judge Coleman cleared her throat. "You said you have evidence?" Vanessa nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Video, audio, witness statements, internal reports filed months ago with the Bureau." The judge glanced toward the DA, Henry Ross, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat like the floor had just turned to quicksand beneath him. Vanessa saw it. She saw the fear in his eyes. He knew this wasn't just about Beckett anymore. This was about him, because corruption never stands alone. It's never just one bad cop. It's a chain. And Henry Ross? He was the one holding the links together. Ross stood slowly, trying to gather himself. Adjusting his jacket like that could somehow fix the mess unraveling in front of him. "Your Honor," he began, his voice thick with fake concern. I believe we should take this to Chambers. This isn't the proper forum for—" Vanessa cut him off before he could finish. "No," she said firmly, her voice cutting through his like a blade. "This is exactly the right forum. The people deserve to hear it. Right here. Right now." The gallery erupted against him with shock, others with approval. People had waited too long to hear the truth, and Vanessa wasn't about to let this moment get swept behind some closed door. The judge leaned back, her face pale, her fingers gripping the edge of the bench like she was holding on for dear life. Vanessa took another step forward, pulling a small digital recorder from her jacket pocket. She held it up for the room to see. "This device contains over 30 hours of recorded conversations, officers, joking about planting evidence, threatening civilians, covering up misconduct. And it doesn't stop there." She turned to the gallery now, raising her voice just enough to reach the back wall. "I have recorded statements from staff in this building, clerks, secretaries, even former bailiffs all, describing a pattern of abuse and corruption tied directly to this courtroom, to this district attorney's office." Henry Ross flinched like he'd been slapped, his face drained of color as he took a shaky step forward. That's outrageous," he stammered. "You have no—" "I have everything," Vanessa shot back. "Including you, Mr. Ross." The crowd gasped again. Vanessa reached into her bag, pulling out another file thick, marked with the FBI's official seal. She placed it gently on the bench in front of the judge, tapping it twice with her finger. "This is a federal case now," she announced. "And you, all of you, are on notice." The judge sat frozen, staring down at the file like it was a live grenade. Beckett, still standing near the aisle, looked like he wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't move. He knew there was no place left to hide. Vanessa turned back to face the room, letting her eyes scan the faces one by one, faces that had doubted her, whispered about her, looked down on her the second she walked through those doors. And then she landed on him. Beckett, the man who had started this fight. She took one slow, steady step toward him. and another, and another. The room went deathly silent as she stopped just a breath away from him. "You put your hands on me," she whispered, her voice so soft it felt like a slap. "You assaulted a federal officer. You tried to humiliate me in front of this entire town." She leaned in even closer, just enough so only he could hear the next part. "And now, you're going to prison for it." Beckett's face crumbled. His lips parted like he wanted to argue, to fight back, to do something. But nothing came out, because he knew, deep down, he knew it was over. The courtroom doors swung open again, and two real federal agents walked in, badges out, guns holstered, faces stone cold. They moved straight toward Beckett without a word, snapping the handcuffs on his wrists before he even thought about resisting. The gallery exploded with noise, shouting, gasping, cheering, disbelief. And Vanessa? She just stood there, watching as the man who had tried to break her was finally being dragged out in handcuffs for the whole world to see. She turned back toward the judge, locking eyes one last time. "This isn't over," she warned. Not by a long shot. And deep down, every person in that courtroom knew she meant every word. The room was shaking, not from the building itself, but from the weight of what had just happened. People were standing on their feet, now some cheering. Some just standing there, stunned, clutching their phones like they couldn't believe they had just witnessed the moment a man like Beckett, untouchable for years, was finally hauled away in cuffs. Vanessa didn't move. Not yet. She watched every step they took as they dragged him toward the back exit. Beckett didn't look so tough anymore. His head hung low, his face drained of every drop of that arrogance he'd been wearing all morning. The same man who had grabbed her, slapped her, humiliated her in front of all these people, was now struggling to keep his balance as two federal agents forced him through the door like a criminal being led to his own reckoning. And that wasn't even the part that hit the hardest. The part that really hit was the way the gallery started turning on the very people they had spent years trusting. You could hear it in their voices now, hushed but sharp. "Who else is she gonna take down? You think the DA's next? Lord, this is bigger than we thought." And it was. Vanessa had made sure of it. But as the agents disappeared with Beckett, Vanessa turned back to the judge because she knew this wasn't just about one dirty officer. It never was. The system doesn't protect men like him by accident. It takes cooperation. It takes silence. And every single person who let it happen needed to answer for it. The judge stood frozen, looking down at the file Vanessa had placed on her bench like it might explode if she touched it. Vanessa took a step forward, voice steady, clear. "Do you have anything you'd like to say, Your Honor?" she asked. The gallery fell quiet again. The weight of the question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Judge Coleman opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time since Vanessa walked through those courtroom doors, the judge looked small. She looked old. And most of all, she looked scared. She reached for the file with trembling hands, flipping it open slowly, her eyes scanning the first few pages, like she already knew what she'd find: names, dates, conversations, cover-ups. Vanessa kept her voice steady. "You knew," she said softly, not accusing, not yelling, just stating a fact that hung heavier than any accusation. The judge sank back in her chair, dropping her hands in her lap like all the fight had drained out of her. The DA tried one last time to take control. He stood, smoothing his tie, clearing his throat like he hadn't just been exposed in front of the entire county. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. But the words sounded thinner now, weaker, like they didn't carry the weight they used to. "I believe we've all seen enough drama for one day," he continued. Let's allow the justice system to—" But Vanessa wasn't finished. She turned, facing him squarely. "Justice?" she snapped, her voice slicing through his like a razor. "You wouldn't know justice if it walked through your front door and shook your hand." The crowd let out a collective gasp. Henry Ross's face flushed red. He took a step toward her, finger raised like he was about to lecture her into submission. But Vanessa didn't flinch. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her voice dropping to just above a whisper, but every ear in the room strained to hear it. "You think this ends with Beckett?" she asked. "You let him do it. You signed off on every deal that kept men like him on the street. You turned your back on every victim that came through these doors, and now you're going to stand there and talk about justice?" She took one more step forward, lowering her voice even more. "Check your inbox when you get back to your office, Henry. The bureau's already waiting." The blood drained from the DA's face like someone had pulled the plug. Vanessa turned back toward the gallery, lifting her chin just a little higher, letting them all see that she wasn't here to play games. She was here to finish what she started. The judge finally spoke, but her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else weak, small. "Court is adjourned," she whispered, banging the gavel like it was the last thing holding her together. And just like that, it was over. Or at least, it looked like it was. The crowd stood in stunned silence as Vanessa turned back toward her father. Derek was still sitting there, tears welling up in his tired old eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something stronger, pride. Vanessa walked over, kneeling beside him, resting her hand on his shoulder. "We did it, Daddy," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time all day. Derek reached up, cupping her face with his rough, calloused hand, pulling her in close. "No, baby," he whispered back, a small smile breaking across his face. "You did it." The two of them sat there for a moment, surrounded by the echoes of a courtroom that would never be the same again. And as they stood together, side by side, one thing was crystal clear to everyone watching. Vanessa Monroe didn't just bring the truth to light, she burned the whole damn house down to make sure everyone could see it. They say when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't just change one moment, it changes everything after it. And that's exactly what was happening in Franklin County. Word had already spread beyond the courthouse walls. Before Vanessa and Derek even made it to the parking lot, people on the street were already talking. Phones were buzzing. News vans started pulling up. Reporters practically sprinted up the courthouse steps, microphones in hand, ready to find out who that woman was and how she'd just turned a sleepy little town in Tennessee upside down in under an hour. But Vanessa wasn't there to give interviews. Not yet. She wheeled her father slowly through the double doors, stepping out into the bright sunlight, squinting as the fresh air hit her like a wave. For a split second, she paused, not because she was tired, but because she knew this was the part no one tells you about. The after. When the fight seems finished, but the war keeps knocking. Derek looked up at her, reaching for her hand again. "You ready to tell them?" he asked softly. Vanessa took a deep breath, glancing over at the growing crowd. Because standing just beyond the courthouse steps wasn't just a handful of reporters, it was the community. Black, white, young, old. People who had seen what went down inside. People who had heard the rumors for years but had never seen anyone brave enough to bring the whole dirty machine to a screeching halt. And now, they were looking to her. Vanessa nodded slowly. "Yeah," she whispered. "I'm ready." She helped Derek settle in place near the bottom of the steps, then straightened her jacket and walked toward the crowd. It didn't take long before someone recognized her. "That's her," someone whispered. "That's the woman from inside. Is it true she's FBI?" The crowd started parting, giving her space without even being asked. All eyes locked on her again, but this time, the energy was different. There was no suspicion in their stares, no judgment, just curiosity. Just hope. A young reporter stepped forward, holding out a shaky microphone. "Ma'am, can you confirm? Are you with the FBI?" Vanessa took another deep breath, glancing back once at her father, before turning toward the cameras. "My name," she began slowly, clearly, "is Vanessa Monroe. I'm a senior internal affairs investigator with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The crowd let out a collective gasp, confirming everything they had just witnessed. Vanessa didn't wait for another question. She had something to say, and she was going to say it. "For months, I've been assigned to investigate reports of misconduct, corruption, and abuse of power in this courthouse and in the Franklin County law enforcement system," she continued, her voice steady, unwavering. People leaned in, hanging on every word. "Today," she went on, "you all witnessed the tip of that corruption when one of your own officers, Travis Beckett, chose to put his hands on me. What you didn't see, what many of you have suspected for years, is that his actions are just one small part of a much larger problem." She let that sit for a moment, making sure every person heard her loud and clear. "This investigation doesn't stop with him," she said, raising her voice so even the people in the back could hear. "It doesn't stop with a slap. It doesn't stop with an arrest. This investigation is about all of it, every deal made behind closed doors, every victim who was silenced, every community member who was told they didn't matter." She paused, scanning the faces again, locking eyes with people who looked like they hadn't dared hope for justice in years. "But hear me when I say this," she added, stepping forward just a little. "This isn't my fight alone. The truth belongs to this community. It belongs to you." The crowd stood still, soaking in her words. "You have a choice," she continued. "You can go home tonight, pretend this never happened, and let them rebuild the same broken system. Or you can stand up, speak out, and refuse to let anyone tell you that you don't deserve better." A voice in the back shouted, "We're with you!" And that's all it took. The crowd erupted not in chaos, but in unity. People clapping, people cheering, people finally feeling like their voices might actually matter. Vanessa felt her throat tighten, emotion threatening to break through her tough exterior, but she held steady. She had to. Derek watched from the edge of the crowd, smiling softly, tears brimming in his tired eyes. He knew exactly what this moment meant for his daughter, for their community, for every person who'd ever been told to sit down and shut up. And Vanessa? She knew this was just the beginning, because while the cameras were still rolling, while the people were still cheering, Vanessa Monroe made herself one silent promise. She wasn't going to stop. Not here. Not now. Not ever. Because justice, real justice, was finally on its way. The courthouse emptied out slowly after that. People left in groups, still buzzing with the energy of what they'd just witnessed, their voices filling the streets outside like waves rolling onto the shore. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled for the first time in a long time. There was something different in the air now, something they hadn't felt here in years. Possibility. Vanessa watched them all go, standing just off to the side of the courthouse steps with Derek, keeping her hand on the back of his wheelchair like she needed to stay grounded. She could still hear the reporters calling out her name from a distance, but she didn't move toward them. Not yet. Right now, she wasn't interested in sound bites or headlines. Right now, she was thinking about what came next. Because there was one thing Vanessa Monroe knew for sure: the real fight didn't happen in front of cameras. It happened when the noise died down, when the lights went off, when the community went home and the people in power started scrambling to put the pieces back together behind closed doors. And you could bet every dollar in your pocket they were already doing exactly that. She looked down at Derek, who sat quietly, staring off toward the courthouse doors like he was lost in thought. "You all right, Daddy?" she asked softly. Derek let out a long, tired breath. "I'm fine, baby girl. Just remembering." "Remembering what?" He tilted his head toward her, his voice low, like the memory weighed more than he could carry. "The first time I sat in a courtroom like this one," he said. "I was 19, uniform on, fresh back from basic training. Thought that uniform was going to mean something." Vanessa felt her throat tighten. She already knew where this was going. "They called me boy," Derek whispered. "Made me sit in the back row while they let the man who attacked your uncle walk free like nothing happened." Vanessa swallowed hard, blinking back the lump rising in her throat. Derek shook his head slowly. "I told myself that day I'd never step foot in another courtroom again if I could help it." Vanessa knelt beside him, resting her hand on his knee. "But you did," she whispered. He smiled softly, his eyes glassy. "Yeah, I did." They sat there for a moment, letting the weight of those words settle between them, because they both knew this wasn't just about today. This was about every time someone like Derek had been told to sit down, to be quiet, to accept injustice like it was part of life. But not today, not this time. Vanessa stood slowly, squaring her shoulders again. "I'm not done," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "Not even close." Derek looked up at her, pride shining through his exhaustion. "You go finish what you started," he whispered. And she intended to, because back inside that courthouse, Judge Coleman and District Attorney Ross weren't going to pack up and disappear without a fight. They were going to regroup, strategize, try to bury the truth all over again if they could. Vanessa knew how this game worked, and she was ready to play it better than they ever imagined. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the messages that had been piling up all afternoon. Calls from bureau headquarters, voicemails from her team, requests for statements, requests for updates, requests for answers. But she didn't reply to any of them, not yet. Instead, she opened the secure file on her phone, the one that held every piece of evidence they'd spent months collecting. Photos, audio recordings, transcripts, names. She scrolled all the way to the bottom. where one name sat highlighted in bold. Judge Martha Coleman. Vanessa let out a slow breath, her jaw tightening. "You're next," she thought to herself, because while Beckett had been the face of corruption that the town could see, Coleman had been the gatekeeper, the one who let it all slide, the one who signed the orders, the one who held the hammer and used it to protect men like Beckett instead of the people she swore to serve. Vanessa tucked her phone back into her jacket and turned toward Derek. "Let's get you home," she said softly. Derek nodded, gripping the armrests of his wheelchair like he was holding onto something bigger than just balance, like he was holding onto hope. Vanessa wheeled him toward the car, but in her mind, she was already 2 steps ahead. Because tomorrow, she was walking right back into that courthouse, and this time, she wasn't leaving until the judge fell, too. It's funny how quiet the ride home can feel after a storm like that. Vanessa kept her eyes on the road, both hands gripping the wheel tighter than she needed to. Derek sat beside her, silent, looking out the passenger side window like he was watching memories pass by instead of streets. Neither of them spoke for the first few miles. There was nothing left to say, not yet. Both of them knew the hardest part wasn't over. It was waiting, lurking just on the other side of the morning. Vanessa pulled the car into the driveway of Derek's small house on the edge of town. She shifted into park but didn't move. She just sat there, staring out at the porch they'd built together when she first came back home for this assignment. It was funny how a place could feel so familiar and yet so far away at the same time. Derek finally broke the silence. "You ain't gotta go back in there tomorrow," he said softly, turning to look at her. "You've done enough." Vanessa didn't turn to face him. She just kept staring at the house. "You and I both know that's not true," she whispered. Derek let out a tired breath. "They'll come for you next, you know that. You humiliated them. People like Coleman and Ross, they don't take that lightly." Vanessa finally turned her head, her voice low but steady. "Good," she said. "Let 'em come." Derek leaned back, rubbing his face like he was trying to wipe the worry off. "Just promise me one thing." She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" He turned, looking her dead in the eye. "Don't fight this thing alone. Not anymore." That hit harder than she expected. Because the truth was, she had been fighting alone for so long, she almost forgot what it felt like to lean on anyone else. But she wasn't alone now. Not really. Not after what the community had seen. Not after the people started waking up. Not after those cameras captured the truth for the world to see. Vanessa nodded slowly. "I promise." Derek nodded back, like that's all he needed to hear. He reached for the door handle, but Vanessa stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Actually, you mind staying with me tonight?" she asked quietly. Derek smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." They spent the rest of the evening at Vanessa's small rental on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a 2-bedroom, 1-story house with squeaky floorboards and peeling paint on the porch. But it was safe. It was theirs for the night. Derek fell asleep early on the couch, worn out from the day's chaos. Vanessa sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of her, files open, notes scribbled in the margins. She knew what tomorrow had to look like. She knew she needed more than just words this time. She needed to force their hand, and there was only one way to do it. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she'd been avoiding all day. Special Agent Marcus Hale, her direct supervisor at the Bureau, the man who had sent her here in the first place, the one who had warned her to stay quiet and collect data, not make waves. Vanessa stared at the screen for a long moment, her finger hovering over the call button. She knew what this meant. Once she made this call, the Bureau would take control of the case. They'd sweep in with their own agents, their own agenda. And as much as she hated to admit it, that might be the only way to protect herself and the community from what was coming next. She pressed the button and held the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then his voice answered, cold and professional as ever. "Agent Hale." Vanessa swallowed hard. "It's Monroe." There was a pause, like he hadn't expected to hear from her so soon. "I saw the footage," he finally said. "You made quite a mess out there." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "I made a statement." Another pause. "You ready to hand it over?" Hale asked, his voice flat. Vanessa closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "Not yet," she replied. "But I need backup. Tomorrow's gonna get messy." Hale let out a low breath. "You sure you want to go back in there?" Vanessa opened her eyes, her voice sharper now. "I'm sure." He was quiet for another beat before responding. Consider it done. Agents will be there by sunrise. Don't move until we give the green light." Vanessa hung up without saying goodbye. She didn't have time for protocol. Not now. She looked back at Derek sleeping on the couch, snoring softly under an old blanket. Tomorrow, everything would either fall into place or blow up in her face. Either way, she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Morning came fast. Too fast. The kind of morning where the air feels heavier than usual, like the world already knows something big is about to go down. Vanessa stood by the window of her small living room, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug, staring out at the quiet street. The neighborhood looked like it always did at that hour. Empty. Still. Peaceful. But her gut told her otherwise. Because today, nobody was walking away clean. She glanced back at Derek, who was still asleep on the couch, blanket pulled up to his chest, face peaceful for the first time in days. Part of her wanted to let him sleep through this next part, let him skip the fallout, but she knew better. Derek wouldn't forgive her if she shut him out now. She'd promised. Vanessa grabbed her jacket, sliding the badge into the inside pocket like it belonged there. Because it did, and after today, everyone left standing would remember that. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Special Agent Hale. "Agents in position. Proceed when ready." Vanessa slipped the phone into her jacket and leaned over Derek, giving his shoulder a soft shake. "Daddy, it's time!" Derek stirred, blinking the sleep from his eyes. It only took a second for him to remember what today was. He nodded without a word, pushing himself upright with a quiet grunt. Neither of them needed to say it. They both knew what they were walking back into. By the time they reached the courthouse steps, the town had already started gathering again. More people this time, twice as many as yesterday. Word had spread like wildfire overnight. Everyone knew what today was. Today wasn't just another court session. Today was a reckoning. Vanessa helped Derek out of the car, wheeling him toward the front doors with her head held high. She didn't have to look to know the reporters were back. She could hear their voices, feel the cameras locking onto her like scopes on a rifle. But this time, she let them come. She stopped just outside the entrance, turning toward the crowd that had gathered on the courthouse lawn. She scanned their faces that had once watched her with doubt and suspicion. Not today. Today, those faces held something else. Expectation. Vanessa cleared her throat and raised her voice just enough to carry across the crowd. "I told you this wasn't over," she called out. "And I meant it." The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. "Today, we're not just here to watch another hearing. We're here to finish what we started. All of us." The cheer that rose up from that crowd felt like a wave crashing against a cliff, loud, unstoppable, powerful. Vanessa turned back toward the courthouse doors and pushed them open, rolling Derek through first. The noise outside faded behind them, replaced by the low hum of hushed voices inside the building. But something felt different. Too quiet, too still. Vanessa scanned the lobby, her instincts kicking into high gear. And then she saw them two men in suits standing near the security checkpoint. They weren't local. They didn't carry themselves like anyone from Franklin County. FBI agents. Hale had kept his word. The taller of the two agents nodded toward Vanessa, his expression unreadable. She nodded back, signaling she was ready. She pushed Derek toward the courtroom doors. But the moment she reached for the handle, something stopped her. A sound. A voice. Coming from just inside. Vanessa froze, pressing her ear to the door. "We don't have to let her in," the voice hissed. It was Judge Coleman. Vanessa's blood ran cold as she leaned in closer. "If she steps in that room," Coleman whispered, "we're done. I'm done. You hear me? Lock those doors. I don't care what it takes. Do not let her take that bench." Vanessa's jaw tightened. She turned to the agents. "You hear that?" she whispered. They nodded. Without waiting another second, Vanessa shoved the door open with both hands, sending it crashing against the wall. The entire courtroom snapped to attention. Judge Coleman stood at the bench, her face pale as chalk, eyes wide with panic. Beside her, Henry Ross stood frozen, mid-conversation, like he'd just been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Vanessa didn't hesitate. She marched down the aisle, her voice echoing through the silent room. "Trying to lock me out again?" she called out, stopping dead center in front of the bench. Coleman's lips quivered, but no words came out. Vanessa turned to the agent standing at the door. "You heard the obstruction yourself." Go ahead." The agents moved fast, stepping into the room, flashing their badges as they approached the bench. The judge took a step back, shaking her head, voice cracking. "Wait, this isn't what it looks like." But no one believed her. Not anymore. Vanessa stood there, staring her down, daring her to try and spin the truth one more time. "You had a chance to do the right thing," Vanessa whispered. "You chose to protect them instead." The agents reached for Coleman's arms, cuffing her right there in front of the entire room. And this time, nobody gasped, nobody flinched, because deep down, they'd all been waiting to see it happen. You ever watch a building fall? Not all at once. Not like in the movies where it explodes and disappears in seconds. In real life, it crumbles slow brick by brick, beam by beam until all that's left is dust. That's what it felt like. Standing in that courtroom, watching Judge Martha Coleman Once, the most powerful figure in Franklin County, being led away in handcuffs like a common criminal. No speeches. No warnings. No more cover. She didn't even try to fight it, because she knew. She knew it was already over. The gallery didn't clap this time. They didn't cheer. They didn't have to. The silence said more than any applause ever could. It was a silence full of realization, full of truth finally laid bare for everyone to see. And standing right there in the middle of it all was Vanessa Monroe. She didn't move for a long moment, didn't speak. She just stood there, letting the weight of what had happened settle on her shoulders. The DA, Henry Ross, didn't even wait for the agents to reach him. He slumped back in his chair, defeated, eyes staring at the floor like he was trying to disappear into it. He knew his name was next on the list. He knew the house of cards had collapsed. And this time, there wasn't a single person left to help him stack it back up. Vanessa let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for months. Slowly, she turned back toward the door, her eyes scanning the faces in the crowd one last time. Some looked relieved. Some looked broken. Some still looked scared. Because when you've lived under the same system your whole life, even freedom feels like unfamiliar ground. And that's when she knew her job wasn't done. Not really, because the hardest part wasn't exposing the truth. The hardest part was what came next: rebuilding, restoring trust, holding the door open so people who'd been locked out for generations could finally walk through without fear. Vanessa made her way to Derek, who waited at the back of the room, sitting quietly in his wheelchair, watching it all unfold with a look on his face that said more than words ever could. She knelt beside him again, resting her head on his shoulder, just like she did when she was a little girl scared of thunderstorms. Only this time, the storm had already passed, and she was the one who had walked right through the middle of it. Derek leaned in, whispering soft but firm. "You did it, baby." Vanessa pulled back, looking him in the eye. "No," she whispered. "We did." Together, they turned toward the courtroom doors, pushing through them one final time. But when they stepped outside, what they saw stopped them in their tracks. The crowd outside had tripled. Hundreds of people lined the courthouse steps and the street beyond, waiting not just to see what happened next, but to stand with her. And for the first time since she'd walked into this fight, Vanessa realized she wasn't standing alone anymore. She stood tall, taking one step forward, raising her voice for all to hear. "Franklin County," she called out, "it's time to take back your courthouse." The cheer that rose up shook the ground beneath her feet, louder than anything she'd heard yet, stronger than anything they'd tried to silence. People surged forward not to tear anything down, but to lift each other up. Neighbors hugged. Strangers shook hands. For the first time in a long time, the community felt like it belonged to them again. Vanessa turned back to Derek, tears brimming in her eyes, the weight of it all finally sinking in. "And Derek?" He just smiled. "I think your mother would be proud," he whispered. Vanessa nodded, her voice catching in her throat. "I hope so." They stood there for a long moment, taking it all in, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. And as the sun broke through the clouds, shining down on that small Tennessee town, Vanessa Monroe knew one thing for sure. The system may have tried to silence her. It may have tried to break her. It may have tried to push her out. But in the end, it had to face her. And when it did, it fell. Sometimes, the most dangerous lie isn't the one shouted in anger. It's the one whispered over time, convincing good people that they're too small to make a difference. But the truth? The truth is, No system, no matter how big, no matter how powerful, can stand forever when ordinary people decide to stand up together. What happened in Franklin County isn't just a courtroom story. It's a reminder that silence protects corruption, and courage starts with one person refusing to look the other way. Justice doesn't come knocking on your door. You have to go out and meet it. You have to stand tall, even when your voice shakes. You have to believe that you're never too old, too tired, or too late to make a difference. Because sometimes, the strongest voice in the room comes from the one who's lived long enough to know what really matters. So wherever you are right now, no matter your age, your past, or your fears, remember this: it's never too late to stand up for what's right. And when you do, you won't be standing alone. And hey, if this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories like this one, and drop a comment below to tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts.